Hello, and welcome to our channel. If you're someone who loves emotional, inspiring, and thought-provoking stories, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Now, sit back, relax, and let us take you into a story that might just touch your heart. In 1978, the small town of Maple Creek, Pennsylvania, was blanketed by a biting early winter. The wind whispered through bare trees, and under a gray sky, the phone rang in a modest wooden house at the end of Spring Valley Road. The call brought devastating news. John Ellis, the family's sole breadwinner, had died in an accident at the mechanical workshop where he had worked for nearly 2 decades. Margaret Ellis collapsed to her knees in the kitchen. She was only 36 years old. Her 3 young children were still asleep upstairs. Her eyes glazed over, not just from the grief of losing her husband, although it tore her apart, but from fear. How would she survive? How would she raise her children? The family had no real assets. The land they lived on was rented, and they still owed money on their car loan. John had left only a few $1,000s in the bank and a house full of unpaid bills. Margaret, once a full-time homemaker, now had to face a harsh new reality. But she refused to fall apart. The next morning, she put on John's old coat, tied up her graying brown hair, and stepped outside in search of work. With no college degree or professional skills, she took a job washing dishes at a local diner, the same one where she used to celebrate her children's birthdays. At night, after cooking, cleaning, and putting the kids to bed, she sat at her mother's old sewing machine and did alterations and repairs for the neighbors. Day by day, year by year, no one could count how many sleepless nights Margaret spent at her work table, or how many meals she skipped to afford her children's school supplies. Her eldest son, David, often woke in the middle of the night to find his mother passed out at the sewing machine. From then on, he learned to help care for his siblings, never once complaining. Margaret lived on a simple belief. If she never stopped trying, life wouldn't always be cruel. In 1995, her youngest daughter, Emily, earned a full scholarship to college, and Margaret finally felt a little weight lift from her shoulders. One day, while passing by City Hall, she noticed a public notice about an auction of tax-defaulted properties. She had no reason to be interested until she saw one line, Lot 17, Sector 3, Fremont Road. Something told her to look closer. It was nearly an acre of vacant land near the South Industrial Park, an area rumored to be part of the city's next major expansion. Nobody paid it any attention. The starting bid was only $10,000, and the auction was sparsely attended. Margaret scraped together every penny she had saved over 17 years, borrowed a little from friends, and placed the winning bid at $12,500. Everyone said she was crazy. 2 years later, the city approved plans to expand the freeway through the industrial zone. Margaret's land suddenly became a prime location. A logistics company offered her $10,000 a month in rent. Then a real estate conglomerate from New York came in with a $3.2 million offer for long-term usage rights. Margaret Ellis, once a penniless widow, now held over $3 million in her hands. She sat in front of her old house, staring at the pile of bills that had once made her cry herself to sleep, hardly able to believe what was happening. But instead of splurging, she chose to reinvest. She learned financial management, took online courses, devoured books on real estate and inheritance law. Over the next decade, she bought and renovated old buildings, turning them into affordable rentals. She wasn't just a savvy investor. She became beloved for her integrity and compassion. In 2010, Margaret founded Golden Haven, a chain of nonprofit retirement homes for low-income seniors. She once said, "I used to think I'd die alone and forgotten. I won't let others live that way." By 2022, Margaret's net worth exceeded $100 million. But she still lived humbly in her old wooden house in Maple Creek. She remained the silver-haired woman who shopped at the farmer's market and chatted with neighbors like any ordinary grandma. But when Margaret turned 70, her memory began to slip. She left the stove on, mixed up her medications, forgot names. After a few scary incidents where she got lost outside, doctors diagnosed her with early-stage Alzheimer's. Though her children cared deeply, They were all busy with careers and families. Then, her youngest son, Jason, who had struggled with unemployment and direction, surprised everyone. He told the family he was willing to quit his job and move in with Mom to care for her full-time. Alongside his wife, Julie, a sweet-talking woman with a warm smile. The couple moved in and took charge of Margaret's daily life. Margaret was deeply moved. She felt blessed. At least one of her children was willing to be there for her in her final years. On her 70th birthday, surrounded by laughter and a feast prepared by her daughters, Jason took her hand and said gently, "Mom, I know your memory isn't what it used to be. If something ever happened, we don't want strangers interfering. Maybe it's best if we transfer the house title to my name now. We'll take care of you, I promise." Margaret remained quiet for a long time. This house wasn't just a place to live. It was her life's monument, the place where she endured hardship and emerged stronger. But looking at Jason's sincere eyes and hearing Julie's soft assurances, she thought maybe she could trust them. And so, she signed the deed. No one knew that day would mark the beginning of a shocking turn in her life. Margaret woke up at 6 a.m. as she had for decades, even though her memory was no longer sharp. She shuffled into the kitchen, searching for the kettle. Julie, her youngest son's wife, was already up, sitting at the dining table scrolling through her phone. Her hair was tied up neatly. Light makeup accentuated her features, and she wore a nude-colored fitted dress that showed off her figure. Margaret raised an eyebrow in surprise. Julie rarely dressed up at home. "Good morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" Julie greeted her sweetly, her voice syrupy. It was all right. I was going to make some porridge," Margaret mumbled as she fumbled with the kettle. Julie gently stepped in, taking the kettle from her hands. "Let me do it, Mom. You just sit and relax. You've been forgetting to turn off the stove lately. Remember when you almost burned the aluminum pot?" Margaret chuckled awkwardly. She knew Julie was right. Her mind had been foggy lately. Once, she even wandered off and got lost in the neighboring community, only to be recognized and helped back home by a paperboy. Breakfast was quiet. Jason, her son, was still asleep. Julie sat, eating, while simultaneously checking the real estate market on her phone. "Mom," she said, glancing up, "the housing prices around here are going crazy. The house next door just got rented for $6,000 a month." Margaret looked up, eyes slightly confused as she tried to process what Julie was saying. Julie continued, "Our house has 2 bedrooms, a big living room, and even a backyard. If we were renting this out, we'd easily get the same, if not more." Margaret nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've heard the neighbors mention that too. But I bought this house ages ago. We're not renting it." Julie put down her chopsticks, her tone shifting. "Mom, I know this might be hard to say, but you know our situation. Jason's unemployed, and my salary barely covers the kids' tuition, insurance, and our debts. You've been living here for 6 months now, and we haven't asked for anything. But," Margaret froze, "but we think it's time to be fair. If you're going to stay, we believe you should contribute a little. Maybe $5,000 a month. That's still less than market rate." She said it so casually, as if she were suggesting something completely normal. Margaret's hand trembled as she put her spoon down. Are you serious?" Julie smiled lightly. "Don't take it the wrong way, Mom. We're not trying to push you out. But think about it. Who lives in someone's house for free? Especially when you have your pension and some savings. We're really struggling." The air turned heavy. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She never imagined that the promise to care for Mom until the end would so quickly turn into a verbal rental agreement. "Julie, this is my house. I've lived here since the beginning. You two only moved in a few months ago." Julie interrupted her gently. "But the title is in Jason's name now. Remember? You signed it over." Margaret stared out the window, her eyes cloudy. That's when she realized she had handed over her life's work to the one child she trusted most. That evening, Margaret sat alone in the living room, wrapped in an old sweater colder than the December wind outside. She remembered when Jason promised to care for her, never let her suffer. She believed him. He was her son. She had raised him with sweat and tears, skipping meals during freezing winters so he could eat. Jason walked in. He was silent for a moment before handing her a cup of warm water. Mom, I know Julie can be a bit direct, but you should understand, we're under so much pressure. The kids need tuition money. I still haven't found a job, and Julie's salary isn't enough. You want me to pay rent? Margaret asked hoarsely, full of disbelief. Jason avoided her eyes, looking down. I don't want to, but Julie has a point. You have your pension and dividend income. We're drowning here. Margaret's voice cracked. Jason, do you remember this house? I bought it with the first money I ever earned. Your siblings, the ones who never asked me for anything, never once demanded a single penny. And you? I gave you the whole house, and now you want rent. Jason was speechless. He couldn't find an excuse this time. Margaret stood, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Jason, I'll ask you one last time. Do you truly want me to pay rent? Jason bit his lip and gave a small nod. Margaret's heart shattered. No tears came, only a deep, hollow silence. The next day, she called David, her eldest, and Emily, her youngest. Both fell silent after hearing the story. Margaret spoke clearly. I want a family meeting. If everyone agrees I should pay rent, I won't argue. But if not, then I want to reclaim what's mine. That afternoon, the little house on Maple Creek filled with life. David drove in from Pittsburgh. Emily brought her kids. Julie, upon seeing the gathering, burst into protest. This is Jason's house. Why are you calling everyone here? They don't have a say anymore. Margaret looked her in the eye, firm and calm. They are also my children. Each of them deserves to know the truth and speak their minds. If you disagree, you can leave. Jason stood behind, silent. He knew he had lost something he could never regain, his mother's trust. Margaret clenched her fists. For the first time in her life, she realized that wealth had never made her feel so utterly alone. The atmosphere in the living room was suffocating. No one sat upright. Every face bore tension. Emily placed a hand gently on her mother's shoulder, while David leaned silently against the window frame, his eyes heavy. Jason sat across from them, his hands tightly clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. Julie had her arms crossed, one leg over the other, lips pursed as if holding back something bitter. Margaret nodded slightly, then spoke with quiet strength. I know what I'm doing may come as a shock to some of you, but I can't stay silent any longer. She paused, looking slowly from one child to the next. Jason was the one I trusted most. When I signed over the deed to this house, I did it out of love and faith. But today, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to ask, was I wrong? David stepped forward gently. No, Mom, you weren't wrong. You spent your whole life sacrificing for us. You don't owe anyone in this house a thing. Emily's voice rang out, full of anger. I still can't believe Jason actually asked Mom to pay rent. This is her house. Her blood, sweat, and tears built this place. It's the only place she can still call her own. Julie scoffed. Oh, please. If you care so much, why don't you take her into your house and care for her yourselves? Emily stood abruptly, her eyes flaring. Because Mom trusted you. She thought she'd be cared for, not used. Jason finally lifted his head, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean for it to go this way. Everything just spiraled. I thought I was doing what's right. I thought Mom could still help us. Help you by giving you the house and then still paying rent? David demanded, his voice trembling with frustration. Margaret raised a hand to calm them. She took a deep breath and said, My children, I don't have much time left. I know my memory is slipping. But what's happened lately has shown me one thing. No one will protect me if I don't protect myself. Everyone went quiet, and I'm going to do just that. That night, after the others had left, Margaret sat alone in her study beside a dusty old box filled with investment documents. She pulled out the copy of the deed transfer, flipping through each page carefully, reviewing every clause. When Julie walked in and saw the scene, she panicked. Mom, what are you doing? Reviewing what I signed. I seem to recall I asked for a clause ensuring the house be used only for caregiving or charitable purposes. Julie's face turned pale. That clause was non-binding. Margaret chuckled softly. But there are laws to protect the elderly, Julie, especially when there's evidence of manipulation or exploitation during mental decline. Julie stepped back, her eyes filling with worry. Margaret rose from her chair. Her gaze no longer bore the frailty of old age. It was sharp, dignified. This was the gaze of a woman who had survived decades of struggle, who had risen from scrubbing dishes to managing millions. "Julie, if you thought I'd sit quietly and fade into a shadow inside my own home, then you never really knew me." The next day, Margaret met with her longtime attorney, Mr. Bernard Quinn, the man who had stood by her side since the early days of building Golden Haven. After hearing her story, Bernard held her hand firmly. "Mrs. Ellis, we can fight this. The transfer was signed while you were already diagnosed with cognitive decline. There are clear signs of coercion. We can take this to court." Margaret nodded. For the first time in weeks, she felt peace. She then met privately with David and Emily, outlining her plan to hire legal counsel to re-examine her asset documents, to create a living trust under her name and her grandchildren's, and to set firm legal clauses. All properties, including the house, would be dedicated to community and elderly welfare. No one could use them for personal gain while she was still alive. The house itself would be repurposed into a model pilot facility for the Golden Haven Foundation. When Jason found out, he broke down. He came to her in tears, claiming Julie had manipulated him, that he never wanted things to go this far. But Margaret only responded quietly, "I forgive you, but I can't go back to how it was." She had given everything and lost even more. But now she stood up, not to reclaim wealth, but to reclaim dignity, trust, and her voice, a voice silenced too long by sacrifice. On Monday morning, a thick fog blanketed the sky, but outside the Allegheny County Courthouse in Pittsburgh, the scene was unusually chaotic. News vans lined the sidewalks, cameras rolled, microphones were raised, and reporters swarmed the main entrance. The name Margaret Ellis had become a national headline just 3 days earlier, when attorney Bernard Quinn officially filed a lawsuit alleging asset exploitation of an elderly person with cognitive decline. It wasn't a case about money. It was about morality, because the victim was none other than Margaret Ellis herself, one of Pennsylvania's most respected philanthropists, founder of the Golden Haven Elderly Care Foundation, once hailed as the mother of thousands of forgotten seniors. Standing by her side that morning were David and Emily, her children who vowed to defend her to the end. Margaret wore a beige overcoat, her silver hair pinned neatly, her steps firm though deliberate. Despite her age, she carried the quiet dignity of a woman who had weathered life's storms and built an empire from nothing. Julie was a stark contrast. She and Jason entered from a side door. Julie wore a sharp black dress, her confidence dimmed. When a reporter asked, "Is it true you demanded rent from your elderly mother-in-law?" she looked down, avoided the camera, and hurried Jason inside without a word. Court convened at 10 a.m. Presiding over the case was Judge Evelyn Grant, known for her sharp mind and uncompromising fairness. Attorney Bernard Quinn began with a firm summary. Margaret had transferred her home's deed to her youngest son while experiencing early cognitive decline, misled by promises that she would be cared for the rest of her life. Instead, her daughter-in-law had demanded $5,000 a month in rent to remain in the very home she had built with her own hands. "Your Honor," Bernard said passionately, "this case is not just civil. This is a cry for justice on behalf of millions of elders who are being treated as burdens and exploited inside the homes they once built for their children." Julie remained hunched, refusing to lift her eyes. Jason glanced at his mother now and then, guilt etched across his face. When called to speak, Julie attempted to justify her actions. "I didn't mean any harm. We were struggling. We just wanted her to contribute as a member of the household." "You define contribution as $5,000 a month?" Judge Grant asked, eyes locked on her. Julie went silent. Then came the damning evidence. A recording of the conversation between Margaret and Julie, secretly captured by Emily during one of her visits. On the tape, Julie's voice was clear. "You've got a pension, you've got investments. It's only fair. Everyone has to pay to live somewhere, even a mother-in-law." The courtroom gasped. Some elderly attendees wept quietly. One older woman whispered, That's exactly what my own daughter once said to me. But I never dared speak out. Silence swept the room. Judge Grant called for a 15-minute recess. Outside, reporters swarmed David and Emily for comments. "We're not here for money," Emily stated firmly. "We're here to protect our mother and the dignity of all parents who gave everything, only to be discarded when they're no longer convenient." Later that afternoon, the court issued a temporary ruling. The house in question and all related assets will be placed under legal supervision pending the outcome of the full hearing. An official investigation into potential elder manipulation was also approved. That night, the media exploded. Across social media, the hashtag #StandWithMargaret began trending. Thousands shared the story, expressing outrage and support. Senior spoke up. Advocacy organizations released statements demanding stricter laws to protect the rights and property of the elderly. Margaret herself gave no public statement. She quietly returned to a modest apartment that David had rented for her while the legal proceedings were underway. She said little, sitting near the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the golden dusk settle across the skyline. Her face was calm, but in her eyes burned something stronger than anger: conviction. The conviction that this time, the truth would speak for itself. News of the lawsuit, a mother asked to pay rent in the very house she once gifted, spread across evening newscasts, not only in Pennsylvania, but in multiple states. Major television networks reported continuously. From CNN to Fox News, no one wanted to miss a story that sparked national outrage and touched on the increasingly fragile bond between generations. While Julie and Jason avoided the press, Margaret stepped into the spotlight in a way no one expected. On Wednesday morning, Margaret accepted an invitation to appear on the popular talk show Voices of America. On national television, she sat across from the host, her face calm, her words slow but powerful. "I'm not here to take back a house. I'm here to take back dignity for all those who spent their lives loving and raising others, only to be treated like burdens by the ones they sacrificed everything for." The host was momentarily speechless. On social media, millions expressed support. One comment read, "She's not just a mother to her son. She's a mother to all of America." Immediately after the show, Margaret received dozens of invitations from senior advocacy groups, universities, and even the Pennsylvania state legislature. She was asked to speak at a special hearing on elder rights and asset protection laws. Even her lawyer Bernard remarked, "I've never seen a civil case become a social movement so quickly." But Margaret didn't like the word movement. She simply called it what needs to be done. That evening, she called a private meeting with David, Emily, and the executive team of the Golden Haven Foundation. In a small room at the nonprofit's main office, she placed a brown envelope on the table. "These are the legal documents to transfer my old house into a community center, a place that supports and protects the elderly who are abandoned, abused, or financially exploited." Everyone was stunned. David asked softly, "Mom, aren't you going to take the house back for yourself?" Margaret shook her head. "No, I once lived there like a ghost. Now it will be a place where people like me can find their voice again." The small house on Maple Creek, once a symbol of hardship and resilience, was completely renovated. Painted in warm yellow tones, it now bore a new sign, Mother Margaret's Home. At the opening ceremony, hundreds attended. Not just the elderly, but students, young volunteers, single mothers. All came to express their gratitude. One widowed woman embraced Margaret, sobbing, "My son kicked me out too. But thanks to you, I know I'm not alone." The media coverage was nonstop. State officials quickly passed a new bill named the Ellis Act, a law strengthening the requirements for transferring property from individuals over 65. It mandated independent cognitive assessments and protected living rights post-transfer. Jason and Julie, realizing there was no way out, came to see Margaret one last time, not to defend themselves, but to apologize. Julie broke down in tears, saying she was consumed by fear of poverty and losing things she'd never truly had. Jason said nothing, only knelt down and held his mother's hand. Margaret looked at them for a long moment. "I don't hate you," she said. But I can't forget. Actions have consequences, and adults must take responsibility for what they do. She stood up and turned away. Not because she was weak, but because she knew there was still much work to do. A month later, Margaret received a handwritten letter from a 14-year-old boy in Michigan. He wrote, "Dear Mrs. Margaret, I never had a grandmother. But if I did, I'd want her to be like you. I hope that when I grow up, I never make my mom feel lonely like you once did." Margaret folded the letter and held it close to her chest. Her fight wasn't over, but now she knew she was no longer fighting alone. On November 20th, the Pennsylvania State Legislature convened a special hearing titled, "Protecting the Assets and Dignity of the Elderly in the 21st Century." The keynote speaker was not a politician nor a lawyer. It was a 75-year-old mother, Margaret Ellis, now a household name across the country. The room fell completely silent as she approached the podium. Dressed in a pale gray suit with her hair neatly tied back, there was no trace of fragility in her eyes. She gazed steadily at the hundreds of lawmakers, officials, and reporters before speaking in a warm, measured tone. "I am not a legislator. I am not a legal expert. I am a mother, a grandmother, and I did what many elderly parents would do. I trusted my child. I don't blame my son. I blame a society that raised children to see aging parents as burdens. I blame a legal system so lenient that contracts signed in moments of cognitive decline can still be deemed valid. And I stand here today, not to complain, but to demand. Demand that we rewrite the law, not just with ink, but with conscience." The room was stunned into silence. Then came a thunderous standing ovation that lasted over a minute. A senior senator was the first to rise, his eyes moist. Then the entire chamber followed. Following that speech, the Ellis Act was not only formally passed, it was expanded into a comprehensive policy package to protect the elderly, including free legal assistance, oversight of property transfers, and a hotline for victims of emotional and financial abuse by family members. But as the public firestorm began to settle, another storm approached Margaret, one that came from the past. One afternoon, while organizing old storage boxes to move into the new community center, David found a small wooden box with a lock. He brought it to his mother. Margaret looked at it hesitantly, then carefully opened it. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, and on top of it, a letter bearing the handwritten words, "To Margaret, if you ever read this, please forgive me." The handwriting was unmistakably that of John, her late husband, gone for over 40 years. Margaret's heart pounded. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. In it, John confessed that in his final year, after learning he had severe heart disease, he secretly borrowed a large sum of money from an old friend, a businessman named Mitchell Lane. To guarantee repayment, he transferred part of the usage rights to a plot of land behind their house, the same land that Margaret would later turn into a multi-million-dollar investment. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd give up your dreams," John wrote. "If something happened to me, Mitchell would keep his share. But if you were strong enough, I knew you'd find a way to reclaim it. Because you are the strongest woman I've ever known." Margaret went still. She had never known that the foundation of her journey to wealth had been tied to a secret debt. And the man named Mitchell Lane, now one of the biggest real estate tycoons in the Northeast, had never mentioned his continued claim on that land. Margaret asked Bernard to investigate. Sure enough, the old paperwork was still legally valid. Part of the land behind the new community center was still under Mitchell's development rights. David was furious. "Mom, we need to sue him. He's quietly held on to that for decades." But Margaret didn't react right away. She sat silently in her office, the letter from her husband in her hand, staring out the window at the fiery red trees of late autumn. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's time I faced the final ghost from my past." And she knew the last chapter of her life was yet to be written. A few days after reading her late husband's letter, Margaret decided to write one of her own, a handwritten note addressed to Mitchell Lane, now CEO of L&H Real Estate, with offices in the heart of Philadelphia's financial district. She didn't call, didn't send a lawyer, just a simple opening line. "Dear Mitchell, I am the wife of John Ellis, and I believe it's time we met." Soon after, she received a reply. A discreet meeting was arranged in a private conference room at the Fairmount Hotel, where Mitchell usually received major partners. He didn't decline. His response read only, "I owe both of you a conversation." That day it drizzled lightly. Margaret, wearing a gray overcoat, walked slowly through the elegant hotel hallway, her heart beating in strange rhythms. When the door opened, Mitchell Lane, now nearly 80, stood to greet her, his silver hair neatly combed, his face more lined than the press photo she'd seen. 40 years, he said quietly, and I've always known this day would come. Margaret sat down, eyes steady. Then why didn't you speak up when you saw me building a community center on that land? Mitchell was silent for a moment. Then he pulled from his pocket an old photograph, her wedding photo with John. I was close to John, he said. We started out together. But I chased status, he chose family. When he came to borrow money, I didn't want to take advantage. But I set conditions to protect my ego. And when he died, I stayed silent, thinking if you didn't know, there was no need to stir the past. Margaret stared at the photo. She had believed she knew everything about John. But now she realized love doesn't always come with full disclosure. I'm not here to fight, she said. I only want to know, do you intend to keep that land? My community project is expanding. If you want to share back, I'll step away. Mitchell looked at her for a long time. In his eyes was something long buried, remorse. Margaret, he said softly, let me make this right. I will donate full usage rights of the land to the Golden Haven Foundation. And not only that, I'll contribute an additional $1 million to support your community house expansion. Think of it as a gift from a man who once made a mistake. Margaret didn't speak. She simply nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. 2 months later, Mother Margaret's home, too, broke ground on the very plot of land that once belonged to Mitchell Lane. The ceremony was humble but warm. Mitchell sat quietly in the back row, said nothing, and simply applauded when Margaret stepped onto the stage. Today, she said, we are not just building another house. We are rebuilding trust that has been lost in many families, but it is never too late to find it again. In the audience, David and Emily held hands. Margaret's grandchildren waved with joy. People came from across the region, not just to attend the opening, but to say thank you. A 12-year-old boy ran up to her with a small bouquet of wildflowers and said, I wish you were America's grandma. Margaret laughed, tears spilling freely. That winter, she returned to her old room and sat by the window, watching golden sunlight spill across the rooftops of the neighborhood where she had once begun with nothing. She opened John's old leather-bound notebook, flipping through his handwritten pages. Then, on the final blank page, she gently wrote, John, I forgive you, and I've learned that not every home needs walls and a roof to be real. A true home is built from compassion, forgiveness, and a hope born from healed wounds. At the bottom, she signed, Margaret Ellis, a mother to the end, but never again alone. It was late afternoon when the golden light slanted across the courtyard of the community home. David, Emily, Jason, and Julie slowly approached Margaret, who was sitting quietly beneath the old maple tree. There were no more defensive glances, no more awkward silences, only the quiet footsteps of children returning to a mother they had once misunderstood. Jason was the first to speak, his voice trembling. Mom, I am sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't see what you went through, what you sacrificed. I thought I was struggling, but now I see how small my struggles were compared to yours. Margaret said nothing, simply reached out and gently held his hand. David stepped forward, his eyes glistening. I always thought you were too strong to need us. I thought you didn't need comfort or help, but I was wrong. Strength doesn't mean you don't need love. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up, so we still had the chance to make things right. Emily knelt beside her mother and wrapped her in a tight embrace, tears running freely. You're not just our mother. You're the woman who taught us what compassion looks like, what forgiveness means. You turned pain into purpose and silence into change. Then Julie, standing behind the others, slowly stepped forward. Her eyes were red, her voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Ellis, no, Mom. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I let fear and pride turn me into someone I don't recognize. I was selfish. I saw your kindness as weakness. But now all I see is strength I could never have imagined. Margaret looked at her with steady eyes, not hard but clear. She didn't speak right away, and Julie dropped her gaze, ashamed. Then Margaret gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You have more time ahead of you than I do, she said softly. Use it well. And there, beneath the turning leaves, all four knelt beside her, not out of formality, but from the depths of love, remorse, and gratitude. They no longer saw Margaret as just a mother who had given them everything, but as a woman whose quiet resilience had moved a nation. They knelt not because she asked them to, but because they finally understood what they almost lost.